It was after midnight, in the middle of a snowstorm, when a U.S. Marine returned to his cabin in the mountains. Before he even reached the door, his canine froze. On the porch stood an 8-year-old girl, shielding her 5-year-old brother from the cold. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She asked one question that would change everything. The Bible says God places people in our path for a reason. That night, the Marine had a choice: walk past them or open the door and trust that calling. What followed proves that sometimes faith doesn't come with miracles. It comes with responsibility. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Snow fell thick and soundless over Cold River Valley, swallowing the road, the trees, and the small cabin at the edge of the land, turning the night into a white, endless quiet that pressed against the windows like a held breath. Staff Sergeant Ethan Walker cut the engine of his pickup and sat for a moment without moving. At 38, he was tall and broad-shouldered, built with the quiet density of a man who had carried weight for most of his life. His hair was clipped short in a habit he never broke after the Marines, dark with threads of gray at the temples, his face angular and weather-worn, a trimmed beard lining a jaw that rarely softened. A thin scar traced his left eyebrow, barely visible unless the light caught it right, a souvenir from a roadside blast overseas that had taken 2 men he never talked about. He lived alone now, by choice and by consequence, in a single-story cabin tucked deep in the Montana Valley where cell service was weak and neighbors were far enough away that silence felt permanent. Beside him in the passenger seat sat Ranger. The German Shepherd was just past 4 years old, large and powerfully built, with thick black and amber fur that darkened along his spine and lightened at the chest and legs. His ears stood erect even at rest, eyes alert, intelligent, tracking the world beyond the windshield. Ranger had been trained once: search patterns, scent work, controlled aggression, but what remained strongest was loyalty. He did not bark unless something mattered. He did not move unless Ethan moved first. Ethan reached for the door handle when Ranger stiffened. Not aggressive, not alarmed, just focused. Ethan paused, fingers still on the metal, and followed the dog's gaze toward the porch light cutting a dim cone through the snow. Someone was standing there. A child. She couldn't have been more than 8. She stood at the edge of the porch, her body angled slightly forward, as if she were bracing against the wind. Her coat was too big, the sleeves swallowing her hands, the fabric stiff with moisture from the falling snow. Wisps of dark brown hair escaped from beneath a knit cap, sticking to her cheeks. Her face was pale, lips chapped, freckles faint beneath the cold. But her eyes were sharp, too sharp for someone her age. Old eyes, Ethan thought. Eyes that watched first and trusted later. Behind her, half hidden by her coat, was a smaller shape. A boy. He was 5, maybe younger, clutching the back of her jacket with both hands, his face pressed into the fabric as if it were the only warm thing left in the world. His hair was lighter than hers, damp curls peeking from beneath a hood, his cheeks flushed red from the cold. His body trembled. Not dramatic, not loud, just the steady, exhausted shiver of a child who had been cold for too long. Ranger let out a low sound in his chest, not a growl, more a question. Ethan opened the truck door. The cold hit him immediately, sharp and biting, cutting through his jacket as his boots sank into fresh snow. He took 2 steps forward and stopped, keeping his hands visible, his posture neutral, the way he'd learned long ago when approaching anything fragile or dangerous. The girl didn't move. She looked at him, then at Ranger, then back at him again, measuring distance, threat, escape. "Sir," she said. Her voice was quiet, steady, no tremor. Ethan waited. "Can we stay one night?" she asked. "Just somewhere dry." No crying, no pleading, just a question, practiced and precise, like she'd asked it before and learned which words didn't get doors slammed. Ranger stepped forward slightly, placing himself half a pace in front of Ethan, body angled toward the children. His tail was still. His eyes never left the boy. Ethan noticed the way the girl shifted then, one small step to the side, just enough to block Ranger's view of her brother. Protective, instinctive, the kind of move you didn't learn from cartoons. "How old are you?" Ethan asked. "8," she said. "And him?" "5." The boy coughed softly into her coat. Ethan exhaled through his nose. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to offer blankets, point them toward the shed, call it a night. He lived alone for a reason. He didn't invite chaos into his house. He had learned what happened when you let people stay. But Ranger sat. Perfect posture, head up, waiting. Ethan had seen that look before. In mirrors, in reflections on dark glass. The look of someone bracing for impact because the world had taught them it was always coming. "Come inside," Ethan said. The girl didn't move. He added, "You'll freeze out here." She hesitated, then nodded once, quick, sharp, like accepting orders. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine cleaner and wood smoke. It was modest, functional furniture, clean surfaces, nothing decorative beyond a folded American flag in a shadow box on the wall. The girl stepped in carefully, eyes scanning exits, corners, windows. The boy followed, blinking at the light, fingers still locked in her coat. Ranger shook the snow from his fur and moved to his mat near the wall, sitting again without being told. The boy stared. "He's sitting like a soldier," the boy whispered, voice raspy. For the first time, the girl's mouth twitched, just slightly. Ethan turned toward the kitchen, pulled a pot from the cabinet, set it on the stove. He moved efficiently, muscle memory guiding him. Water, heat, canned stew, bread warmed in the oven. He didn't ask questions yet. Hunger came first. When he set the bowls down, the boy reached for the spoon too fast, hands shaking. "Slow," Ethan said gently. "You eat too fast. It hurts." The girl watched him carefully as she guided the boy's hands, nodding once in thanks without looking up. They ate in silence. Ethan leaned against the counter, arms crossed, watching without watching. The girl ate carefully, conserving, eyes flicking toward her brother every few seconds. The boy finished first and looked at Ranger again. "Does he sleep?" the boy asked. Ranger's ears flicked. "Sometimes," Ethan said. The boy smiled, a real smile, gone as fast as it came. Later, Ethan gave them blankets and pointed toward the couch. The girl hesitated at the doorway, then turned back. "Thank you," she said. Ethan nodded. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the chair by the window, Ranger at his feet, watching snow pile against the glass. Memories came uninvited. Sand instead of snow, heat instead of cold, the sound of a radio cutting out mid-sentence. He thought of the way the girl stood in front of the boy, thought of choices he'd made and ones he hadn't been able to. Near dawn, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Ethan stood, heart already sinking, and walked toward the living room. The blankets were folded. The door was unlocked. They were gone. On the kitchen table sat a piece of torn notebook paper, weighed down by an empty mug. The handwriting was uneven, careful. "Thank you for letting us stay. We didn't take anything." Ethan closed his eyes. Outside, Ranger lifted his head and stared toward the trees, ears high, body tense. Snow still falling as if nothing had changed at all. Morning came, pale and uncertain, the snow thinning to a light drift that revealed the edges of the valley without warming it, the kind of dawn that made sound travel farther than it should. Ethan Walker knew something was wrong before he reached the living room. The quiet had changed. It wasn't the restful silence of sleep, but the hollow kind that follows departure. He stopped at the threshold and scanned the space, the way he had learned to scan rooms long ago, corners, floor, door, the shape of absence itself. The blankets were folded, squared with care. The couch cushions were neat. The front door was unlocked. He felt the weight in his chest before he saw the note on the kitchen table, a torn piece of notebook paper held down by an empty mug. The handwriting was careful and uneven, the letters formed slowly, as if the writer had stopped to listen between each word. "Thank you for letting us stay. We didn't take anything." Ethan closed his eyes for a beat, the paper warm beneath his fingers, and let the disappointment come without fighting it. He had known this was a possibility. He had still hoped otherwise. At his feet, Ranger rose from his mat, ears up, body already angled toward the door, tail stiff with purpose. The German shepherd's thick black and amber coat caught the gray light as he moved, muscles shifting beneath fur worn glossy from use. He was 4, maybe a little older, strong without being bulky, disciplined in the way dogs learn from disciplined men. He did not whine. He did not bark. He looked at Ethan and then toward the trees, asking without sound. "All right," Ethan said quietly, voice steady even as his stomach tightened. "Let's see where they went." Outside, the cold bit harder than the night before. Snow still fell, thinner now, and the valley smelled clean and sharp, like iron and pine. Ethan knelt near the porch and studied the ground. 2 sets of small prints led away from the door, one lighter, uneven, the other shorter and closer together. They headed east, toward the line of trees that bordered the property. He touched the snow beside the tracks, felt the softness where the crystals had not yet crusted over. Fresh enough. Ranger lowered his head, nostrils flaring, breath steady as he picked up the scent. Ethan followed, boots crunching softly, the prints leading off the packed path and into deeper drifts where the snow swallowed ankles and slowed progress. The children had tried to stay hidden, stepping where branches fell, skirting open ground. Smart, too smart for their ages. The trail bent toward the road that cut through the valley. At the edge of it, the tracks scattered, wind and passing tires erasing what remained. Ethan stood there for a moment, jaw set, scanning the distance. He could have turned back. He didn't. He drove instead, Ranger in the passenger seat, eyes tracking every movement beyond the windshield. The first stop was the gas station 10 miles down, a low concrete building with fogged windows and a single pump blinking green. Inside, the clerk, a woman in her late 40s with narrow shoulders and a tired face, looked up as the bell chimed. She had short blonde hair pulled back tight and skin worn thin by long shifts and dry heat. She wore kindness carefully, like something that could be spent too quickly. "Morning," she said, cautious but polite. "Morning," Ethan replied. "You see 2 kids come through? Girl about 8, boy younger, on foot?" She frowned, thinking, eyes drifting to the window. "They were here before dawn. Girl asked for water. The boy looked sick." She hesitated, then added, "I offered to call someone. She said no." "Which way did they go?" "Toward the woods, old logging road." Ethan thanked her and left a few bills on the counter. Outside, Ranger was already pulling toward the tree line, scent clear now, the dog's body taut with focus. The logging road was narrow and half-buried, winding through snow-draped pines where the light thinned and the cold deepened. The prints reappeared there, smaller and closer together, the boy's steps uneven, dragging at the toes. Ethan's pace quickened. He found them less than a mile in, tucked against a fallen trunk where the snow piled high on one side and left a pocket of shadow on the other. The girl, Emma, was kneeling, hands shaking as she tried to coax the boy to drink from a dented bottle. Her coat was open now, wrapped around him, her cap gone, hair plastered to her cheeks. The boy, Caleb, sat slumped against the wood, eyes glassy, breathing shallow, skin flushed and damp. He did not look up when Ranger stepped forward and sat, ears high, blocking the wind. Ethan crouched at a distance, voice calm. "Hey, it's me." Emma's head snapped up. For a heartbeat, she looked ready to run, to fight, to do anything but stay. Then she saw Ranger and her shoulders sagged. "He's hot," she said, words tumbling out now, the control finally cracking. "I can't make him drink." Ethan pressed 2 fingers to Caleb's neck, then to his wrist. Fast, too fast. He lifted the boy's pant leg and saw the foot. Swollen, angry red, a ragged blister split open and oozing, the skin around it puffy and warm. Infection. The kind that crept in quietly and took hold when a body was already tired. "We're going back," Ethan said. Emma shook her head, tears spilling free at last. "We can't. We'll get in trouble." "You're already in trouble," he said gently, "and I'm not leaving you here." He lifted Caleb with care, the boy whimpering once before sagging against his chest. Emma grabbed her brother's shoes, then hesitated, looking around as if the trees themselves might accuse her. Ranger stood, positioning himself at Ethan's side, a steady presence that allowed no argument. They moved quickly back to the truck. The drive to the urgent care clinic was longer than it should have been, the road slick and slow, Ethan's hands tight on the wheel as he called ahead, voice clipped, precise, the way it had been trained to be when seconds mattered. The clinic was small and bright, smelling of antiseptic and coffee. A nurse met them at the door, a woman in her early 30s with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and calm brown eyes. She moved with efficiency born of repetition, her voice steady as she took Caleb from Ethan's arms and ushered them inside. The physician on duty, a lean man with sharp features and wire-rimmed glasses, examined the foot and nodded once. "Good thing you brought him in," he said. "Another day and we'd be having a different conversation." Emma stood against the wall, arms wrapped tight around herself, watching every movement, flinching when Caleb cried out in his sleep. Ethan stayed where she could see him, close enough to be reassuring, far enough not to crowd. When the fever finally eased and the boy's breathing steadied, Emma slid down the wall and sat on the floor, head in her hands, shoulders shaking with quiet sobs she tried to swallow. Ethan knelt beside her, offered a paper cup of water. "You did good," he said. She shook her head. "I almost lost him." "You didn't." She looked up then, eyes red, fierce and frightened all at once. "Don't make us go." Ethan held her gaze, the words he'd been carrying since dawn settling into place. "I won't." By afternoon, they were back at the cabin, Caleb asleep on the couch with his foot bandaged and elevated, Ranger stationed nearby like a sentry. Snow began to fall again, thicker now, erasing the road and softening the world. Ethan set a pot on the stove and watched the steam rise, thinking of the logging road, the gas station, the way the valley could swallow people whole if no one went looking. He felt the shape of a decision forming, heavy, inevitable. Outside, Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked, eyes fixed on the tree line as the light faded. Somewhere beyond the snow, the valley held its breath, and Ethan knew the quiet would not last. Snow kept falling over Cold River Valley, not in a storm this time, but in a steady, patient way, as if the land itself were testing how much weight it could bear before breaking. Caleb slept for most of the first day back at the cabin. Ethan laid him on the couch, his small body dwarfed by the heavy wool blanket pulled up to his chin, the bandaged foot propped carefully on a stack of folded towels. The boy's face was pale, but no longer flushed. His breathing slow and even, the dangerous heat finally gone from his skin. Every hour, Ethan checked his temperature, changed the dressing, noted small improvements the way he once noted coordinates and timings, methodical, quiet, controlled. Ranger stayed close, lying on the floor beside the couch, his head resting on his paws, amber-flecked eyes opening every time Caleb shifted. The dog was 4 years old, but carried himself older, disciplined by training and shaped by Ethan's moods. His fur was thick along the shoulders and neck, a natural shield against the cold, and a faint scar ran along his right flank where barbed wire had once caught him during a search exercise. He did not like closed doors, he did not like raised voices, and he did not leave children unattended. Emma hovered near the kitchen, keeping distance without ever really stepping away. She moved carefully, quietly, like someone who had learned that attention could be dangerous. She washed the cups they had used at the clinic, lined them up by size without being asked, wiped the counter twice even when it was already clean. She was small for 8, thin at the wrists, her coat still hanging too loose on her shoulders. When she glanced toward Caleb, her eyes softened, then hardened again just as quickly, the guard snapping back into place. She slept that first night in the armchair near the couch, knees drawn up, one hand resting where she could feel her brother breathe. Ethan noticed all of it. He did not comment. The next morning, when the light crept in weak and gray through the windows, Caleb woke hungry. Real hunger, not the cautious testing of food he'd shown before. Ethan heated oatmeal on the stove and mashed a banana into it, stirring slowly while steam fogged the glass. When he set the bowl down, Caleb reached for it, then stopped, looking at Ranger. "Can he eat first?" the boy asked, voice hoarse but hopeful. Ranger's ears twitched. Ethan hid a smile. "He eats after." Caleb nodded solemnly, satisfied, and took his first spoonful. Some of the tension drained from the room with that simple act. Ethan crouched near the door afterward, pulling on his boots. "You want to help?" he asked. Caleb's eyes widened. "With what?" "Ranger's breakfast." They moved slowly out onto the porch, the cold biting but manageable in daylight. Ethan measured the kibble, showed Caleb how to hold the scoop steady, how to wait. Ranger sat perfectly still, tail flat, eyes locked on the bowl. When Ethan nodded, Caleb tipped the food into the dish. Ranger waited one more second, then stepped forward, eating with controlled precision. "I did that," Caleb said, awe coloring his voice. "You did," Ethan agreed. From the doorway, Emma watched, arms crossed tight against her chest. She didn't smile, but the line of her shoulders eased. As days passed, a fragile rhythm took shape. Ethan cleared snow from the driveway and the path to the shed, his movements efficient, the work grounding. Caleb shuffled along behind him when his foot allowed, leaning on a stick Ethan had sanded smooth, pretending it was a staff. Ranger supervised everything, circling wide, pausing to sniff the wind. Emma stayed inside more often, cooking simple meals from what Ethan had stocked: eggs, soup, rice, always asking permission before touching anything. She slept lightly, waking at small sounds, eyes darting to the windows before she remembered where she was. It was on the third evening, as the sun bled orange and violet across the valley, that Ethan finally spoke of the past. They were seated at the table, Caleb on the couch, half asleep, Emma across from Ethan, fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," Emma said suddenly, eyes fixed on the tabletop. "We won't make trouble." Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "I know," she swallowed. "People always say that before they send us away." The words landed heavier than she intended. Ethan felt something shift in his chest, a pressure he recognized but had learned to avoid. "I had a family once," he said. Emma looked up, startled. "A wife, a daughter." He paused, choosing the words carefully. "I was overseas, training exercise stateside when it happened. Highway accident, ice, a truck that didn't stop in time." He did not describe the call, the flight home, the way the house had felt wrong without them. He didn't need to. The silence did enough work on its own. Emma's face softened, the hard edges blurring. "I'm sorry." Ethan nodded once. "Me too." They sat with that truth between them, not shared but acknowledged. Outside, Ranger barked once at nothing Ethan could see, then settled again. That night, Emma cooked without being asked. She burned the first batch of rice and apologized so fast it nearly became a chant. Ethan told her it was fine and meant it. When they ate, Caleb talked about everything: the snow, the dog, the way the ceiling creaked. Emma listened, letting him fill the space, her eyes never quite leaving Ethan. But danger did not announce itself. It lingered at the edges, in the way Emma flinched when a car passed on the road, in the way Ranger bristled at unfamiliar sounds. Ethan felt it too, a tension beneath the quiet. He checked his phone more often, kept the porch light on longer. Late that night, as the wind picked up and snow rattled against the windows, Ethan stood at the sink, staring into the dark reflection. He saw himself older there, heavier with responsibility he had not planned for. He thought of the logging road, the gas station clerk's concerned eyes, the way Emma had blocked Ranger without thinking. This was not a shelter anymore. It was becoming something else. Ranger lifted his head, ears forward, attention fixed on the tree line beyond the glass. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. Nothing moved, no lights, no sound. Still, the feeling remained, coiled and waiting. Behind him, Emma stood in the hallway, watching his reflection instead of the window. "Are we safe?" she asked quietly. Ethan turned, met her eyes, and answered with the only truth he had. "For now." Outside, the snow fell thicker, covering tracks, hiding paths, sealing the valley in white. Inside the cabin, 3 lives pressed together under a roof never meant to hold them. While somewhere beyond the trees, something unseen took note. The snowstorm arrived without warning, rolling down from the mountains like a living thing, swallowing the valley in thick white curtains that erased distance and sound, turning the world into a narrow circle of visibility around the cabin. Ethan Walker noticed the truck before he heard it. Ranger was the first to react. The German shepherd rose from his place near the hearth, ears snapping upright, body stiffening with a tension that had not been there moments before. His low warning sound was not a growl, but it carried weight, measured, deliberate, trained. Ethan followed the dog's gaze through the front window, just as headlights cut through the snow, sweeping across the trees and briefly illuminating the porch. A dark SUV rolled to a stop at the edge of the drive. Emma froze where she stood near the kitchen counter, a plate half dried in her hands. The color drained from her face so fast it frightened Ethan more than the vehicle itself. Her fingers tightened around the porcelain until her knuckles went white. "That's him," she whispered. Ethan didn't ask who. He stepped calmly toward the hallway, placing himself between Emma and the front door without making it obvious. He lowered his voice. "Caleb, upstairs, now." Caleb, still limping slightly but stronger each day, hesitated only a second before obeying. Emma grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the stairs, her movements sharp and urgent. Ranger remained planted near Ethan's leg, eyes locked on the door. The knock came a moment later, firm, confident, practiced. Ethan opened the door part way, letting the cold air and snow swirl in. The man standing on the porch was tall and lean, mid-40s maybe, with a narrow face and sharp cheekbones that gave him a permanently severe look. His dark hair was combed back neatly despite the wind, and a short, well-maintained beard framed a mouth that smiled too easily. He wore a heavy coat over plain clothes, the kind meant to look official without drawing attention, and a badge hung clipped at his belt, catching the porch light just enough to be noticed. "Evening," the man said smoothly. "Name's Mark Delaney, County Enforcement." His voice was calm, friendly even, but his eyes moved constantly, scanning past Ethan's shoulder, taking inventory. "What can I do for you?" Ethan asked. Delaney flashed the badge briefly, not long enough to study. "I'm looking for 2 minors, a girl and a boy. They ran off from their legal guardian earlier this week. We've had reports they were seen in this area." Ethan felt Ranger shift beside him, muscles tightening. He rested one hand casually on the dog's head, a grounding gesture for both of them. "Haven't seen anyone," Ethan said evenly. Delaney nodded as if he'd expected that answer. "Mind if I take a look inside, just to be sure everyone's safe?" "No," Ethan replied. "I do mind." For the first time, Delaney's smile faltered, just a fraction. Enough. "You understand," Delaney said, voice still pleasant, "that harboring runaways can cause complications." Ethan held his gaze. "I understand you don't have a warrant." The wind howled across the porch, rattling the light fixture overhead. For a moment, neither man moved. Then a sound came from inside the house, a floorboard creaking upstairs. Delaney's eyes snapped toward it. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs before Ethan could stop her. She stood there, small and rigid, one arm stretched protectively in front of Caleb, who peered out from behind her shoulder. "That's him," Emma said, her voice breaking but loud enough to carry. "He's lying." Delaney's expression changed instantly. The friendliness drained away, replaced by something colder, sharper. "Emma," he said gently, as if addressing a frightened animal. "Come here. You don't need to be scared." Emma shook her head violently. "You work for him, for my uncle." The word hung in the air like a challenge. Delaney sighed, rubbing his temples as if burdened by the inconvenience of truth. "Your uncle is worried sick," he said. "He wants you home, where you belong." "He killed our parents," Emma shouted. "For the land. He burned the barn and shot them when they ran out." Caleb began to cry, quiet and shaking, burying his face in Emma's back. Ethan felt something go cold and hard inside his chest. Delaney straightened, eyes flicking to Ethan. "Kids say things when they're confused." "They were hiding in the cellar," Emma continued, tears streaming now. "We heard everything." Silence swallowed the porch. Ethan took a slow step forward. "You need to leave." Delaney looked at Ranger, then back at Ethan, calculating. "You don't want to get mixed up in this," he said. "There's money involved, good money, enough to make problems go away." Ethan reached into his pocket slowly, deliberately. Delaney's hand twitched toward his coat. Instead of a weapon, Ethan pulled out his phone and held it up. "You've been recorded since you stepped on my porch." Delaney's jaw tightened. "And my location's been shared," Ethan continued calmly, "with the sheriff's office and a couple people I trust." The storm intensified, snow whipping sideways now, obscuring the road. Delaney glanced toward his vehicle, then back to Ethan. His smile returned, thinner this time. "You're making a mistake." "Maybe," Ethan said, "but it's mine to make." Delaney took a step forward anyway. Ranger moved. The dog surged ahead, placing himself squarely between Delaney and the stairs, teeth bared, body low and ready. His bark exploded into the night, deep, commanding, unmistakably a warning. Delaney swore under his breath and reached into his coat. The shot was loud in the storm, a sharp crack that echoed off the trees. Pain tore across Ethan's shoulder, hot and immediate, spinning him back against the doorframe. He gritted his teeth and stayed upright, vision narrowing but clear enough. Ranger lunged, snapping at Delaney's arm, forcing him back a step. Emma screamed. Caleb cried out. Red and blue lights flashed suddenly through the snow, cutting through the chaos. "Sheriff's office!" a voice shouted. "Drop the weapon!" Delaney froze, disbelief flashing across his face as two patrol trucks skidded into the drive, doors flying open. Deputies poured out, weapons raised, boots crunching in the snow. Delaney raised his hands slowly, the gun slipping from his fingers and disappearing into the white. Ethan slid down to one knee, breath coming hard now, blood soaking into his jacket. Ranger returned to his side instantly, pressing against him, whining softly. Emma ran down the stairs and knelt beside Ethan, her small hands hovering, unsure where to touch. "Don't die," she whispered fiercely. "Please." Ethan managed a tight smile. "Not tonight." Delaney was cuffed and dragged toward a patrol car, his protest swallowed by the storm. A deputy approached Ethan, crouching to assess the wound, calling for medical support. As the snow continued to fall, heavy and relentless, the truth finally surfaced, quietly, irrevocably. And in the cold, white silence of Cold River Valley, something that had hunted in the dark was brought into the light. Winter did not end all at once. It loosened its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if Cold River Valley itself needed time to accept that the worst had passed. Ethan Walker spent the first 2 weeks after the shooting sleeping in short, careful intervals. The bullet had torn through muscle near his shoulder, missing bone by inches, leaving behind a deep ache that flared whenever he moved too fast or lifted too much. The doctors had stitched him, lectured him, and sent him home with instructions he followed more faithfully than he expected. Pain, he had learned, was easier to manage than uncertainty. Ranger stayed close through it all, lying beside the couch where Ethan slept, lifting his head every time Ethan shifted, amber-flecked eyes, alert even in rest. The dog had lost some weight in the days after the storm, his appetite dulled by vigilance, but his posture remained steady, watchful, as if guarding something newly sacred. The legal process moved in parallel, louder and messier than the quiet life Ethan preferred. Sheriff's deputies came and went, boots tracked slush across the entryway, questions piled up in careful stacks. The man who had called himself Mark Delaney was no longer a name spoken with uncertainty. He was a suspect, a witness, a liability. The investigation reached outward, past the valley and into courtrooms and records offices, uncovering what Emma had known all along. Her uncle, Daniel Frost, a broad, thick-necked man in his late 40s with a permanently flushed face and hands rough from land work, had wanted the property their parents owned along the river. When persuasion failed, violence followed. The fire, the gunshots, the bribes that kept mouths shut. It all came apart under scrutiny, thread by ugly thread. Emma did not attend the hearings. She did not need to. She had already survived the truth. Caleb healed faster than anyone expected. Once the infection cleared and his strength returned, the boy seemed to bloom, laughter coming easier, fear loosening its hold. He limped less each day, then not at all, racing Ranger across the snow-packed yard, breath puffing white in the air as he shouted the dog's name. Ranger indulged him with patience, never knocking him over, never straying too far, the shepherd's movements precise and gentle despite his size. To Caleb, Ranger became something more than a dog. He was proof that large things could be kind, that protection did not always come with pain. Emma changed more quietly. The first sign was sleep. She stopped waking at every sound, stopped curling inward with her back to the wall, stopped counting exits before sitting down. One night, Ethan passed the hallway and saw her sprawled across the bed they had set up for her, one arm flung over the pillow, hair fanned across the blanket, breathing deep and unguarded. The sight hit him harder than the gunshot ever had. He stood there longer than he meant to, the weight in his chest unfamiliar and heavy. The paperwork arrived in thick envelopes, stamped and signed and returned. A caseworker named Sarah Milton took the lead, a woman in her early 40s with a calm voice and an honest face. She was tall and slender, her dark hair worn in a practical braid down her back, her skin lined lightly at the corners of her eyes from years of listening more than speaking. She dressed simply, sensible boots and wool coats, and she treated Emma and Caleb with a respect that surprised them both, asking questions and waiting for answers without rushing. Sarah did not promise miracles. She promised process, protection, time. Ethan sat across from her at the kitchen table, Ranger at his feet, and listened as she explained long-term guardianship, foster care, custody. The words felt heavy in his mouth when he repeated them. He had never planned for this. He had barely planned for tomorrow. "You don't have to decide everything today," Sarah said, meeting his gaze, "but you've already done the hardest part." "What's that?" Ethan asked. "Showing up," she replied. The decision came in pieces. A signature here, a phone call there, school enrollment forms, doctor appointments. A second bedroom cleared out and repainted, the walls no longer bare but not crowded either. A careful balance between shelter and space. Ethan learned the rhythms of a household that was no longer his alone. He learned that cereal disappears faster than expected, that silence can be companionable instead of lonely, that laughter has a way of rearranging priorities without asking permission. The valley watched all of this with quiet interest. Neighbors who had once kept their distance stopped by with casseroles and wood for the stove. Jacob Miller, the old rancher who lived 5 miles down the road, appeared one afternoon with a bag of apples and a nod that passed for approval. He was in his late 60s, weathered and stooped, his beard a wild gray tangle that made him look older than he was. He spoke little, but when he looked at Emma and Caleb, there was something like recognition in his eyes. "Good kids," he said, and meant more than the words suggested. Time did what time always does. It smoothed the sharpest edges. Snow melted. The creek swelled and then settled. The days lengthened, and with them, the sense of permanence grew stronger. Years passed, marked by small milestones rather than grand ones. Emma grew taller, her hair darkening, her voice losing its childlike edge. She learned to cook meals that filled the house with warmth, to drive the old truck down the dirt road with steady confidence, to stand her ground without bracing for impact. She kept a journal she never showed anyone, filling it with careful handwriting and sketches of the valley, of Ranger sleeping in the sun, of Ethan standing at the fence line, watching the horizon. Caleb shot up in height seemingly overnight, his laughter louder, his questions endless. He followed Ethan everywhere, absorbing lessons without realizing it. How to split wood, how to read the weather, how to stay calm when things went wrong. One evening, without thinking, he called Ethan Dad. The word landed softly and stayed. No one corrected him. Ranger aged with dignity. His muzzle grayed, his pace slowed, but his presence remained constant, a quiet shadow at the edge of every room. He no longer needed to guard against threats. He guarded moments instead. On a clear winter evening years later, Emma stood on the porch and watched the snow fall again, lighter now, almost gentle. The house glowed behind her, warm and steady. Caleb's laughter drifted from inside, and Ethan's voice followed, calm and sure. She thought of the night she had stood in the same place, smaller and colder, asking for nothing more than shelter. She understood now what she could not then. Inside, Ethan looked around at the life that had grown without his permission and entirely because of his choice. He thought of doors and thresholds, of the way one decision can ripple outward, changing the shape of everything it touches. He knew that if anyone asked, Emma would say he saved them. But as the winter settled in, softer than before, Ethan knew the truth was simpler and heavier. They had saved him. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or fire from the sky. Sometimes they come quietly, through an open door, a warm meal, or the courage to say, "Come inside," when fear says, "Stay away." If you believe in God, perhaps this is how He works most often, not by changing the world all at once, but by placing people in each other's paths at the exact moment they need it most. In our daily lives, we may never be asked to save someone in a dramatic way, but we are given small chances every day to show kindness, to protect the vulnerable, to choose compassion when it would be easier to look away. Those small choices matter more than we realize. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you are watching from and what this story meant to you. And if you believe in stories that remind us of faith, humanity, and second chances, consider subscribing to the channel. May God bless you and your family. May He protect those who are struggling, guide those who feel lost, and reward every act of kindness, seen or unseen. And may we all remember, sometimes the miracle is not what happens to us,